My wife cheated on me with my best friend, so I did. The unthinkable. And what happened next shattered their lives while I watched from the ashes, reborn. Chloe and I had what you'd call a storybook life. The kind of life people scroll past on social media and feel a pang of envy for. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 5, and had built a world together from the ground up. We met in our early 20s, 2 kids with more dreams than sense, and we'd managed to make most of them come true. We had the nice house in the suburbs, the 2 cars in the driveway, the careers we were both proud of. I was a software architect, a job that demanded long hours but paid well, and she was a graphic designer whose freelance career had taken off, allowing her to work from home, a flexibility we both cherished. It was a life of comfortable routines, weekend trips to the coast, and quiet nights spent with a bottle of wine, planning a future that seemed as bright and limitless as the sky. And then there was Ben. Ben wasn't just a friend. He was a brother to me, a constant presence in my life since we were 5 years old. We learned to ride bikes together, navigated the awkwardness of high school together, and stood beside each other as best men at our respective weddings. When Chloe and I first started dating, Ben was our biggest cheerleader. He and Chloe developed their own friendship, a bond I encouraged. I loved that the 2 most important people in my life got along so well. He and his wife, Emily, were our permanent double-date partners. Our lives were deeply, inextricably intertwined. The 4 of us were a unit. So when the first hairline crack appeared in our perfect facade, I almost didn't see it. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. It started with the phone. Chloe, who had always been casual about her devices, suddenly became attached to hers at the hip. It was always face down on the table, or clutched in her hand. When I'd walk into the room, she'd angle the screen away, or close an app with a speed that felt just a little too practiced. When I asked who she was texting so much, she'd wave a dismissive hand and say, "Oh, just a demanding new client," or "A group chat with the girls is going crazy." I wanted to believe her. I had no reason not to. Trust was the bedrock of our relationship, the one thing I never, ever questioned. But a seed of unease had been planted, a tiny, nagging voice in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. It was a feeling more than a fact, a shift in the atmosphere of our home that I couldn't put my finger on. The easy intimacy we once shared started to feel strained, replaced by a polite distance that felt foreign and cold. It was like watching a beautiful photograph slowly fade, the colors dulling day by day, and not knowing how to stop it. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress from my job was making me paranoid. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It lingered in the silences between us, a silent testament to the growing chasm that was opening up right under my feet, threatening to swallow the life I had so carefully built. The cracks, once they started to appear, began to spread with an unnerving speed. The small, dismissive gestures from Chloe became more frequent, more pronounced. The late-night client emergencies started piling up, often coinciding with times I knew she had less work on her plate. There were more girls' nights out than ever before, and she would come home smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize, and a nervous energy that was a stark contrast to her usual relaxed demeanor. Her stories about her evenings became vague, filled with holes that I could have driven a truck through. She'd mention a movie she saw with her friends, but when I'd ask a simple question about the plot, she'd stumble, her eyes darting away as she tried to piece together a plausible answer. It was the little lies, the unnecessary ones, that started to bother me the most. She was building a wall around herself, brick by brick, and I was on the outside looking in. Ben started acting strangely too. Our weekly basketball games, a tradition we'd held for over a decade, were suddenly being canceled at the last minute. "Sorry, man, something came up," he'd text, with no further explanation. When we did hang out, he couldn't look me in the eye. He was overly friendly, almost performatively so, clapping me on the back a little too hard, laughing a little too loudly at my jokes. He'd ask about Chloe constantly. "How's Chloe doing? Haven't seen her in a while." It was a question laced with a strange, feigned innocence that made my skin crawl. He was trying to gauge what I knew, I realized later. He was testing the waters, trying to see if I was suspicious. The easy camaraderie we'd shared our entire lives was gone, replaced by a tense, awkward dance of avoidance and deception. The breaking point, the moment my vague unease crystallized into cold, hard suspicion, came during a weekend trip Emily, Ben's wife, had planned for the four of us. We went to a cabin in the mountains, a place we'd been to many times before. The entire time, the air was thick, with a tension only I seemed to notice. Chloe and Ben were masters of plausible deniability, never interacting directly for too long, but I saw the glances, the fleeting looks across the dinner table when they thought no one was watching. The way they both reached for the same bottle of wine and their hands brushed for a second too long. It was 1,000 tiny betrayals, a secret language being spoken right in front of me. That Saturday night, after a few drinks, I went to bed early, claiming a headache. I lay in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest, listening. About an hour later, I heard the soft creak of the cabin's back door. I crept to the window and looked out, and there they were. Chloe and Ben, standing by the edge of the woods, their figures silhouetted by the moonlight. They were talking, their heads close together. Then, I saw Ben reach out and tuck a stray piece of hair behind Chloe's ear. It was a gesture so tender, so intimate, it felt like a physical blow. Then he leaned in and whispered something, and Chloe laughed. A quiet, secretive laugh that was not meant for me. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't stress. This was real. I was watching my wife and my best friend, the two pillars of my world, conspire against me in the dead of night. I stumbled back from the window, my hands shaking, a cold dread washing over me. The storybook life was a lie. The trust was a sham, and I was the fool who hadn't seen it coming. The drive home from the cabin was the quietest 4 hours of my life. Emily was blissfully unaware, chattering about how much fun she'd had. Chloe and Ben sat in the back, a car length of space between them. The silence they shared, more damning than any conversation. I could feel their guilt radiating from the back seat, a palpable, suffocating force. I said nothing. I just gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and drove. The image of them in the moonlight was burned into my mind. I knew I couldn't confront them based on a stolen glance and a whispered secret. They would deny it. They would call me crazy, jealous, insecure. They would turn it around on me. And I, the rational, trusting husband, would be made to look like the villain. I needed proof. I needed something cold, hard, and undeniable. Something that would shatter their web of lies so completely that there would be no escape. The following week was a blur of feigned normalcy. I went to work. I came home. I kissed my wife hello and asked about her day, all while feeling like an actor in a play about my own life. Inside, I was a coiled spring of rage and grief. Every smile she gave me felt like a betrayal. Every touch felt like a lie. I started my investigation quietly, methodically. I was a software architect, my mind trained to find patterns, to debug broken systems. My own marriage had become a broken system, and I was determined to find the bug. I started with our phone bills. We were on a family plan, and I had access to the detailed records online. I spent hours cross-referencing numbers, my heart sinking with every match I found. There it was, in black and white. Dozens of calls and hundreds of texts between Chloe and Ben, often late at night, sometimes lasting for over an hour. There were calls made just minutes after she'd kissed me goodnight, texts sent while she was sitting next to me on the couch. The sheer volume of it was staggering. It wasn't just a friendship. It was a constant, secret dialogue. Next, I turned to our shared cloud account. We had it set up to automatically back up our photos. I told myself I was invading her privacy, but I knew I had already been robbed of something far more valuable. I scrolled back through months of photos, past the smiling vacation pictures and holiday snapshots. And then I found it, a hidden folder. Its name was innocuous, just a random string of numbers. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. It was like opening a door to a secret life I never knew existed. There were pictures of them together, not in a group, but alone. Selfies in his car, Ben's arm slung casually around her shoulder, a picture of their hands intertwined on a cafe table. A photo of Chloe, smiling, wearing Ben's favorite college sweatshirt, a sweatshirt I hadn't seen in years. But the final, soul-crushing blow was a short video. It was shaky, clearly filmed by Chloe. It was just a few seconds long, filmed inside Ben's car. He was driving, and he turned to her, a wide, easy smile on his face. A smile I hadn't seen him give anyone but Emily in years. He just looked at her, and she whispered, "What?" He didn't answer. He just reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, and the video cut out. That was it. That was all I needed. The tenderness in that simple, silent gesture told me everything. It wasn't just a physical affair. They were in love. Or at least, they had built a fantasy of love on the wreckage of our lives. I closed the laptop, a cold, profound numbness spreading through me. There was no rage anymore, no grief, just a terrible, hollow clarity. The woman I loved and the man I called my brother were gone. In their place were two strangers who had systematically dismantled my world, all while smiling to my face. The hours after the discovery were strangely calm. The storm of emotion I expected, the screaming, the crying, the desire to smash things, never came. Instead, a chilling, almost supernatural clarity washed over me. It was the kind of calm you feel in the eye of a hurricane, a quiet, empty space where the world stops spinning. I sat in my home office, the damning video still open on my laptop, and I saw my path forward with absolute certainty. Confrontation was pointless. What would it achieve? Tears? Excuses? The pathetic, predictable drama of the caught cheater? I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. They had written me out of their secret narrative, making me the oblivious, cuckolded husband. They didn't deserve a scene. They didn't deserve my anger. They deserved nothing. They deserved silence. They deserved absence. My decision was made in that moment, not with heat, but with ice. I would vanish. I would excise myself from their lives so completely it would be as if I had never existed. I would become a ghost, a memory they could never confront, never apologize to, never find closure with. Their punishment wouldn't be a single, explosive event. It would be a lifetime of wondering, a perpetual, unanswered question hanging over their heads. My mind, usually occupied with complex code and system architecture, shifted to logistics. I became the architect of my own disappearance. I spent the next 3 days in a state of meticulous, focused activity. I researched small, remote towns 1,000 miles away, places where no one knew my name. I found a small, furnished apartment for rent in a quiet town nestled in the mountains, a place that looked like the exact opposite of my suburban life. I paid 3 months' rent up front with my personal credit card. I systematically began to untangle my life from theirs. I went to my bank and opened a new account. I methodically transferred my personal savings, half of our joint savings exactly, half, not a penny more, and set up automatic payments for my own bills. I downloaded all the important documents from our shared drive, financial records, personal files, anything that was mine. I created a new, private cloud account and uploaded everything. I was erasing my digital footprint from our shared life. I took an inventory of our home, not with sentimentality, but with cold detachment. What was mine? What was theirs? What was shared? I decided to take only what was undeniably mine and easily portable. My clothes, my books, my personal computer, a few sentimental items from my childhood that predated her. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the art on the walls, the kitchen appliances I would leave behind. They could have the life we built. It was tainted now anyway. The hardest part was Emily, Ben's wife. She was my friend too, an innocent bystander in this demolition. She deserved to know the truth. But how could I tell her, without shattering her world in the same way mine had been shattered? I wrestled with this for a day before deciding on a course of action. I couldn't be the one to tell her face to face, but I couldn't leave her in the dark. I created a new, anonymous email address. I compiled the evidence, the call logs, the photos, the video into a single, password-protected file. I would send it to her after I was gone. The password would be simple, something only she would know. A private joke between the four of us from a happier time. It felt like setting a timer on a bomb, but it was the only way. She deserved the truth, and she deserved to receive it on her own terms, without me there to witness the fallout. I was not just leaving, I was performing a surgical removal, cutting away the diseased parts of my life with precision and finality. There would be no tearful goodbyes, no dramatic exits, just a quiet, clean break. The day I left was a Tuesday. It was gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It felt appropriate. Chloe had an all-day workshop in the city, one of those client things that I now knew was a lie. It gave me a full day. I woke up next to her that morning for the last time. I watched her sleep for a moment, a stranger with a familiar face, and felt nothing. The love had been hollowed out, leaving an empty shell. I got up, showered, and got dressed as if it were any other day. She stirred as I was leaving the room. "Have a good day at work," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "You too," I said, my voice even. "I love you," she added, an afterthought. I paused at the door, my back to her. I didn't turn around. I just said, "Yeah," and walked out. That was the last word I ever spoke to her. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, my plan kicked into motion. I had already packed my personal belongings into boxes and hidden them in the garage. I worked with a quiet, efficient fury, loading my car with the curated pieces of my former life. I was amazed at how little there was. My entire existence fit into the trunk and back seat of my sedan. I walked through the house one last time, a ghost in my own home. I looked at the photos on the wall, the smiling faces from a life that was now a fiction. I felt a brief pang, not of sadness, but of a strange, detached nostalgia, like looking at an exhibit in a museum. This was the life of a man I used to be. Before I left, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, and I wrote my note. I had agonized over what to say, writing and rewriting drafts in my head for days. In the end, I kept it simple. I took my wedding ring, a simple platinum band, and placed it in the center of the table. Next to it, I laid a single key to the house. I took a piece of paper and wrote just 3 words on it. It wasn't enough. I didn't specify what it was. Let them wonder. Let them fill in the blanks with their guilt. Let them argue over its meaning for the rest of their lives. I locked the front door behind me and put the key I kept for myself under the mat, knowing she had her own. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ben. "Hey man, you up for a beer tonight? Feels like it's been a while." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I stared at the message, a bitter smile touching my lips. I typed back a single word, "busy." Then I blocked his number. I blocked Chloe's number. I deleted my social media apps. I was going dark. The drive away was surreal. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I just drove, heading east, toward the mountains, toward my new, unknown life. With every mile I put between me and that house, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something else. Freedom. As the city skyline disappeared behind me, I pulled over to the side of the road. I took out my laptop, connected to my phone's hotspot, and opened the anonymous email I had prepared. I attached the file of evidence, typed Emily's email address, and in the subject line I wrote, "The truth." For the body of the email, I simply wrote the password. Then, with a final, decisive click, I hit send. The bomb was armed. The timer was ticking. I closed the laptop, put the car in drive, and didn't stop until the sun went down. My new life began in a town so small it felt like a secret. It was nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering, pine-covered mountains that seemed to scrape the sky. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the thick, humid air of the city I'd left behind. My apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building above a quiet bookstore. It was small, just a living room, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, but it was all mine. The furniture was mismatched and worn, but the place was clean, and a large window in the living room looked out over the main street. offering a view of the mountains in the distance. The first few days were a blur of practical tasks that kept my mind from spiraling. I unpacked my boxes, arranging my books on the built-in shelves. I bought groceries, marveling at the simple act of filling a refrigerator that was only for me. I set up my computer and contacted my company's HR department, explaining that due to a sudden family emergency, I needed to transition to fully remote work, effective immediately. They were surprisingly understanding, and since my job was already mostly remote, they approved it with minimal fuss. I had a new address, a new routine, and a new life. And yet, the ghosts of my old life were relentless. My phone, which I kept on silent, was a constant source of anxiety. It would light up with calls and texts, a frantic, desperate stream of communication from a world I no longer belonged to. Dozens of missed calls from Chloe. Texts that progressed from confusion to panic to anger. "Where are you? Is everything okay? This isn't funny, Alex. Your car is gone and so are your clothes. Call me now. What did you do? Why would you just leave? After everything we have, you just walk away?" Then came the messages from Ben. First, feigned concern. "Hey man, Chloe's worried sick. We're all worried. Just let us know you're safe." Then, after a few days, the tone shifted. He must have realized I knew. "Alex, we need to talk. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I read them all with a detached, clinical interest, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. Their words had no power over me anymore. I never responded. After a week of their relentless digital assault, I went to a small electronics store and bought a cheap, prepaid phone. I spent an hour transferring the few contacts I wanted to keep my parents, my sister, a couple of old friends who were mine alone. Then I walked to a bridge that spanned a rushing river at the edge of town, took my old phone, the one filled with their desperate pleas and pathetic excuses, and I threw it into the water. I watched it disappear into the rapids, a final, symbolic severing of the last tie that bound me to them. That night, I sat by my window, watching the stars come out in a sky clearer than any I had ever seen. The silence was absolute. There were no frantic buzzes from my phone, no ghosts in the machine. There was only the quiet hum of the bookstore below and the distant whisper of the wind in the pines. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. The pain was still there, a dull ache deep in my chest, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was a part of me now, a scar that would likely never fade, but it didn't have to be my entire story. I had survived the demolition. Now, it was time to start rebuilding. About 2 weeks into my new life, I got a call on my new phone from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Alex? It's Sarah." Sarah was a mutual friend, one of the few people I felt was truly neutral, a friend to both Chloe and me, but loyal to the truth above all else. I had sent her my new number with a short message. "I'm safe. Don't share this." I knew she wouldn't. "How are you?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. "I'm okay," I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. "I'm managing." There was a pause, and then she said, "Things are a mess back here, Alex." I didn't ask for details, but she offered them anyway. She felt I deserved to know. Her account was delivered in a quiet, somber tone, painting a vivid picture of the chaos I had left in my wake. Chloe's reaction, Sarah said, had been a masterclass in performative victimhood. For the first 2 days, it was frantic panic. She had called everyone, my parents, her parents, all of our friends weeping, telling them I had just disappeared without a word. She played the part of the abandoned, terrified wife perfectly, and for a short time, people believed her. I was the villain, the unstable husband who had cracked under pressure and run away. Ben played his part too, the loyal best friend, organizing a search party, comforting Chloe, telling everyone how worried he was. They were a team, a united front of deceit. Then, the email landed in Emily's inbox. Sarah said Emily didn't open it for a day. She saw the subject line and the anonymous sender and was scared. But curiosity, Or perhaps a splinter of suspicion she didn't even know she had got the better of her. She opened it. She entered the password. And she saw everything. The fallout was apocalyptic. Emily, a quiet, reserved woman, apparently became a force of nature. She confronted Ben, not with tears, but with a cold, terrifying rage. She printed out the photos and threw them at him. She played the video for him on a loop. There was no room for denial. Faced with the undeniable proof, Ben confessed everything. Sarah told me that Emily kicked him out of the house that same night. She packed his bags and left them on the front porch. The storybook marriage they had, a mirror image of my own, was over in an instant. The shrapnel from that explosion hit Chloe immediately. Emily called her, and while Sarah didn't know the details of the conversation, she knew it ended with Emily telling Chloe she never wanted to see or speak to her again. Suddenly, Chloe's narrative of the abandoned wife crumbled. The truth began to trickle out, first to their close friends, then to their wider social circle. The story changed. I was no longer the villain. Chloe and Ben were. They tried to control the new narrative, of course. They claimed it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness. They said they were going to come clean, that I had overreacted by leaving. But the evidence was too damning, the deceit too calculated. No one was buying it. Their united front was beginning to crack under the pressure. The sympathy they had initially garnered evaporated, replaced by whispers and cold shoulders. They were learning a hard lesson. Lies are a fragile foundation on which to build anything, and their entire world, built on a mountain of them, was beginning to slide. I listened to Sarah's account without emotion, my face a stoic mask, but inside, I felt a grim, cold satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of seeing a crooked picture finally set straight. The truth was out, and the consequences were just beginning. One of the cornerstones of my plan was financial disentanglement. Love and trust can be betrayed, but numbers don't lie. In the life we had built, I was the primary earner. My salary as a software architect was substantial, while Chloe's freelance income was sporadic and significantly less. We lived a lifestyle that was comfortable, but it was a lifestyle supported largely by my income. She enjoyed the fruits of my labor, the nice house, the expensive vacations, the designer clothes without, it seemed, any appreciation for the source. Before I left, I had been meticulous. I took exactly half of our joint savings, not a penny more, leaving her with a significant cushion. I wasn't trying to leave her destitute. I was simply taking what was mine. But I knew that cushion wouldn't last forever, not with the way she spent money. I closed our joint credit cards, the ones with exorbitant limits that I was solely responsible for. I called the companies, reported my card lost, and had them issue a new one in my name only, sent to my new, secret address. I left her with her own card, the one with a modest limit that was tied to her own income. The first sign that the financial reality was setting in came about a month after I left. Sarah called me again, a reluctant but necessary conduit of information. She told me Chloe was in a panic. The mortgage payment was due, a payment that had always been automatically deducted from our joint account, which I had since closed. The property taxes were coming up. The car payment for her expensive SUV was her responsibility now. Suddenly, the comfortable life she had taken for granted had a price tag, and she was the one who had to pay it. She had tried to reach me, of course. She had left desperate voicemails on my old, now defunct number, messages that she didn't know were screaming into the void. She had emailed my old personal address, which I no longer checked. She was realizing, with dawning horror, that her financial safety net had not just been removed, it had vanished without a trace. Her freelance work, which had been enough to cover her personal spending, was nowhere near enough to cover the massive overhead of the life we had shared. She turned to Ben, naturally. But Ben had his own financial inferno to deal with. Emily had, quite rightly, frozen their joint accounts. She had hired a high-powered divorce attorney, and Ben was quickly learning how expensive infidelity could be. He was living in a cramped, overpriced apartment, his own income stretched to its limit. He was in no position to support Chloe's lifestyle. Sarah told me about a particularly nasty fight they'd had, overheard by a mutual friend. Chloe had been crying, screaming at him about money, about how she couldn't afford the house. Ben had yelled back that it wasn't his problem, that he had his own life to worry about. The romance, it seemed, had withered quickly once the reality of bills and responsibilities set in. Their secret affair had been a fantasy, a vacation from their real lives. But now, the vacation was over, and they were left with the bill. Watching from afar, I felt no sympathy. This wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't taken anything from her that wasn't rightfully mine. I had simply removed myself from the equation. And in doing so, I had revealed the truth, that the beautiful life she thought she was entitled to was a life I had built, a life she had helped to destroy. She was now living in the ruins, and for the first time, she was being forced to see the true cost of her choices. I knew at some point I would have to deal with Ben directly. Blocking his number and disappearing was a good first step, but it wasn't enough. Our friendship, a bond forged over nearly 3 decades, deserved a proper burial. It deserved a tombstone, and I was going to be the one to carve the epitaph. I didn't want a shouting match. I didn't want to give him the chance to spew his excuses and justifications. I wanted to deliver a final, killing blow, but with the cold precision of a surgeon, not the messy rage of a brawler. I waited until I knew the initial chaos had subsided. About 6 weeks after I left, I wanted him to be stewing in the consequences, to be feeling the full weight of what he had done. I used a new anonymous email address, one he couldn't trace back to me. The subject line was simple: a eulogy. I spent a full day crafting the message. It was not an angry rant. It was a cold, dispassionate autopsy of our friendship. I started at the beginning, reminding him of our shared history, the moments that had defined our bond. I wrote about the time I defended him from a bully in the 3rd grade, the time we road-tripped across the country after college, the night I talked him through his fears before he proposed to Emily. I laid the foundation of our brotherhood, brick by brick, reminding him of the sacredness of what he had thrown away. Then I pivoted. I laid out the evidence of his betrayal with the same clinical precision. I didn't attach the photos or the video. I described them. I described the look on his face in the car, the way his hand cupped her cheek. I quoted the times and dates of their late-night calls. I showed him that I knew everything, not just the what, but the how and the when. I wanted him to understand that this was not a guess. It was a confirmed diagnosis of his treachery. I didn't accuse him of ruining my life. I didn't even focus on Chloe. I focused on him and me, and what he had destroyed. You were my brother, I wrote. Not by blood, but by choice. And you killed him. You took 30 years of loyalty and trust, and you set it on fire for a cheap thrill. It wasn't just my marriage you betrayed. It was us. Every memory we ever shared is now tainted by this. Every laugh, every secret, every moment of support is now a lie. I ended the email with a final, definitive statement. This is not a conversation. This is not an invitation to explain or apologize. There is nothing you can say that will ever change what you did. This is a notification of death. The friend you knew is gone, and you are the one who killed him. Do not ever try to contact me again. For me, you no longer exist. I read it over a dozen times, ensuring every word was perfectly placed, every sentence a carefully sharpened blade. Then, I hit send. I knew he would receive it. I knew he would read it. And I knew it would gut him in a way no fistfight ever could. I had refused to be the victim in this story. Instead, I had become the historian, the one who would write the final, damning chapter of our friendship, and then close the book forever. I felt no satisfaction in it, only a profound and heavy sadness for the brother I had lost, not to death, but to something far worse, his own weakness. The next wave of the fallout came, predictably, from the parents. My own parents were shocked and saddened, but ultimately supportive. I had always had a solid relationship with them, and when I called to tell them a vague version of the truth that Chloe had been unfaithful and I had left to start over, they didn't press for details. They just told me they loved me and to take care of myself. Chloe's parents, however, were a different story. The Andersons were people who cared deeply about appearances. They were pillars of their community, their lives, a carefully curated performance of success and respectability. Their daughter's scandalous affair and the implosion of her marriage were not just a family crisis, they were a public relations nightmare. Her mother, Carol, was the first to try and intervene. She somehow got my new number from my own mother, who naively thought she was trying to help. Carol called me one evening, her voice a syrupy blend of fake concern and steely resolve. "Alex, darling," she began as if we were just catching up. "We are all so worried about you. And poor Chloe is just beside herself. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I listened in silence as she spun a web of excuses. Chloe was lonely because I worked so much. Ben had taken advantage of her vulnerability. It was a mistake, a terrible, regrettable mistake, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with forgiveness and time. "She loves you, Alex," Carol insisted. "You two built a beautiful life together. You can't just throw it all away over one little slip-up." "A slip-up?" I finally said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Carol, she had a months-long affair with my best friend. She lied to my face every single day. That's not a slip-up. That's a character flaw." The syrup in her voice vanished, replaced by a sharp, accusatory edge. "And you're perfect, are you? Running away like a coward instead of staying to fight for your marriage. You abandoned her, Alex. You left her with all the bills and all the responsibility. What kind of man does that?" "The kind of man who refuses to be a doormat," I shot back. "The life you think I abandoned was a life I paid for. She made her choices, and now she's living with them. This is not a negotiation. It's over." I hung up before she could respond and immediately blocked her number. Her husband, Tom, tried a different tactic a few days later. He sent me an email, a long, rambling message that was part lecture, part threat. He talked about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of family, and the damage I was doing to their reputation. He implied that if I didn't do the right thing and come back to fix the mess I'd made, there would be consequences, though he was vague about what those might be. It was a pathetic attempt at intimidation, and it only solidified my resolve. They didn't care about my pain. They didn't care about the betrayal. They cared about the optics. They cared about the gossip at their country club. Their daughter's happiness was secondary to their own public image. I responded to his email with a single sentence: "Your daughter is no longer my problem." The Andersons were a product of the same shallow world Chloe and Ben had been so desperate to impress. A world of surfaces, where what matters is not who you are, but what people think you are. They were enablers, the architects of the very value system that had allowed their daughter to justify her own treachery. By trying to force a reconciliation, they had only exposed their own moral bankruptcy and proven, once and for all, that I had made the right decision to walk away from it all. The affair between Chloe and Ben had been born in a fantasy world. It was a world without consequences, without mortgages, without the mundane realities of a long-term relationship. It was a world of stolen moments, secret texts, and the illicit thrill of the forbidden. But once their secret was exposed, they were violently ejected from that fantasy and forced to live in the real world. And in the real world, their relationship, built on a foundation of lies, began to crumble almost immediately. Sarah, my reluctant informant, gave me periodic updates, painting a grim picture of their new reality. The first major crack appeared over money. Chloe, unable to afford the house on her own, had expected Ben to step in and save her. She wanted him to move in, to take over my role as provider, to seamlessly transition from secret lover to supportive partner. But Ben was drowning in his own financial and legal troubles. His divorce from Emily was turning ugly and expensive. He had no desire to take on Chloe's mountain of debt. Their arguments became legendary among their dwindling circle of mutual friends. They fought about the mortgage, about Chloe's spending habits, about Ben's refusal to commit. The easy, charming chemistry they had in secret curdled into bitter resentment in the harsh light of day. Without the stability and resources I had provided, they were just two desperate people clinging to the wreckage of their own making. Their social lives also disintegrated. They were pariahs. Old friends stopped calling, invitations to parties and get-togethers dried up. They were a walking, talking scandal, and no one wanted to be caught in their blast radius. They were forced into an isolated existence, with only each other for company, which only seemed to amplify their mutual animosity. The traits they had once found exciting in each other became sources of irritation. Chloe's need for drama and attention, which Ben had found alluring when he was the secret object of her affection, now grated on him. Ben's charming irresponsibility, which Chloe had seen as a refreshing contrast to my steady reliability, now just looked like weakness. Sarah told me about a moment that perfectly encapsulated their downfall. They had shown up, uninvited, to a mutual friend's birthday party. They walked in together, trying to project an image of a happy, defiant couple. But the room fell silent. People stared, then turned away, resuming their conversations in hushed tones. Chloe and Ben stood there, isolated in a room full of people they once called friends, a toxic island of their own creation. They left after 10 minutes, a cloud of shame and failure following them out the door. Their affair was like a parasite. It had fed on the healthy bodies of our two marriages, draining them of life and trust. But once its hosts were gone, it had nothing left to sustain it. It was starving, turning on itself, consuming its own rotten core. I felt a sense of detached pity watching their self-destruction. They had chased a fleeting, selfish desire, and in the process, they had lost everything: their partners, their friends, their homes, their self-respect. They were left with nothing but each other, and it was becoming clearer by the day that this was the cruelest punishment of all. A year passed. A full 4 seasons cycled through my quiet mountain town. The sharp, agonizing pain of the betrayal slowly softened, its edges worn down by time and distance. It was still there, a part of my history, but it no longer defined my present. I had settled into a new rhythm, a life that was smaller, quieter, and infinitely more authentic than the one I had left behind. I had made friends, not a wide circle, but a few genuine connections. There was the owner of the bookstore beneath my apartment, a wry, silver-haired woman named Eleanor, who recommended books and shared stories over coffee. There was a group of guys I met, who went hiking every weekend, and I joined them, finding a strange solace in the physical exertion and the vast, silent beauty of the mountains. I was getting to know myself again, the person I was before I became one half of a couple. I learned that I enjoyed solitude, that I was more resilient than I ever thought possible. I was healing. I hadn't heard anything from my old life in months. Sarah had stopped giving me updates, respecting my need to move on. The silence was a balm. I assumed that Chloe and Ben had imploded, as expected, and had slunk off to lick their wounds in private. I had almost managed to convince myself that they were truly gone from my life forever. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my blood run cold. "Alex, please." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. It was her. It was Chloe. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hand hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to send it to the trash, unread, to deny her even this one small intrusion into my new life. But another part, a darker, more curious part, needed to know. I needed to see what pathetic, self-serving plea she had concocted after a year of silence. I clicked it open. The email was long, a rambling, stream-of-consciousness mess of apologies, excuses, and desperate pleas. She wrote about how sorry she was, how she thought about me every day, how leaving was the biggest mistake of her life. She told me that she and Ben had fallen apart months ago, that their relationship was a toxic disaster, built on a terrible mistake. She painted a picture of a lonely, miserable life, a life of regret and solitude. She said she had been in therapy, that she had done the work, and that she finally understood the depth of her betrayal. She wrote about the good times we'd had, the life we built, the love she swore she still felt for me. It was a carefully crafted performance of penitence, designed to pull at my heartstrings, to make me feel sorry for her. The email ended with a desperate, hopeful question. "I know I don't deserve it," she wrote, "but I have to ask, is there any part of you that could ever find it in your heart to forgive me? Could we just talk? I would do anything, Alex, anything to have a second chance." I read the email twice, my face impassive. A year ago, these words might have destroyed me. They might have opened the floodgates of grief and rage all over again. But now, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no sadness. Just a profound, unshakable indifference. She was a stranger, confessing her sins to a man who no longer existed. Her words were a ghost's whisper, and I was no longer listening. The unraveling of Chloe and Ben was, from what I later pieced together, both predictable and pathetic. Their grand romance, forged in deception, couldn't survive the harsh glare of reality. After Ben refused to move into the house and take on the financial burden I had carried, their relationship entered a death spiral. They were trapped in a cycle of blame and resentment. She blamed him for not stepping up, for not being the man she thought he was. He blamed her for her incessant drama and for the catastrophic loss of his own marriage and financial stability. Their fantasy had been built on the idea that they were two special souls finding each other against the odds. The reality was that they were just two deeply flawed people who had made a selfish, destructive choice. Ben's career took a significant hit. He worked in a small, tight-knit industry where reputation was everything. The news of the affair, and the particularly messy divorce from Emily that followed, spread like wildfire. He was seen as untrustworthy, a man who would betray his closest friend. Opportunities dried up. Clients became wary. The charm that had served him so well in the past now looked like slick deceit. He was forced to take a lower-paying, less prestigious job, a constant, humbling reminder of his downfall. Chloe's situation was even more grim. After Ben made it clear he wouldn't be her financial savior, she was forced to sell the house. The house we had chosen together, the place where we had planned our future, was sold at a loss in a down market. She had to move into a small generic apartment on the other side of town, a place that was a world away from the curated perfection of our old life. Her freelance career, which had always been more of a hobby subsidized by my income, couldn't support her. Sarah had told me, before our communication ceased, that Chloe had been forced to take a dull, entry-level graphic design job at a soulless marketing firm, the very kind of corporate existence she had always claimed to be above. They were living the consequences of their actions in the most tangible ways. Their punishment wasn't a dramatic, cinematic event. It was the slow, grinding erosion of the lives they thought they were entitled to. It was the daily humiliation of a smaller paycheck, a shabbier apartment, a colder shoulder from a former friend. It was the quiet, gnawing realization that they had torched their own happiness for a fleeting, hollow prize. The ultimate irony was that in betraying me, they had betrayed themselves even more. They had chased an illusion of a better life, only to end up with something far worse than what they'd had. Their affair was a desperate attempt to escape the perceived boredom of their stable, loving relationships, but they had confused stability with stagnation. They had mistaken comfort for a cage. Now, they were truly trapped, not by love or commitment, but by the bleak, lonely consequences of their own choices. They had no one to blame but themselves, and that, I imagined, was the most bitter pill of all. Chloe's desperate email hung in the air of my quiet apartment, a digital ghost from a past I had worked so hard to bury. I let it sit there for a full day, unanswered. I needed to be sure of my response, to ensure it came from a place of clarity and strength, not from a place of residual anger or pain. I had one final thing to say to her, one final door to close, and I wanted the sound of it shutting to be absolute and unmistakable. The next afternoon, I sat down at my computer and began to type. I didn't agonize over the words this time. They came easily, flowing from a place of deep settled truth. My response was not long. It was not emotional. It was a simple, direct, and final rejection. Chloe, I began, using her name to establish a formal, impersonal tone. I have received your email. I'm writing this response not to engage in a dialogue, but to provide you with the closure you seem to be seeking, so that you will not feel the need to contact me again. I addressed her points one by one, not to argue, but to dismantle her narrative. You say you are sorry, I wrote. I don't doubt that you feel a sense of regret, but your regret seems to be focused on the consequences to your own life, not on the pain you caused. You are sorry you got caught. You are sorry your life fell apart. True remorse is not about seeking forgiveness. It is about accepting the permanence of the damage you have done. I continued, my fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. You ask for forgiveness. That is not something I am capable of giving you, because the man you are asking it from no longer exists. The Alex who loved you, the Alex who trusted you and Ben, the Alex who would have done anything for you, you killed him. He died in that cabin, watching you and his best friend in the moonlight. You are asking for forgiveness from a ghost, and ghosts cannot forgive. The final paragraph was the most important. It was where I would draw the final, indelible line. You are a part of a past I have worked hard to move on from. My life now is quiet, and it is peaceful, and it is mine. There is no room in it for you. There are no second chances. There is no us. There is only the memory of a profound betrayal that I will carry with me always. I do not hate you, Chloe. I do not feel anything for you at all. And that is the truest closure you will ever get. Please do not write to me again. This is the last time you will ever hear from me. I read it over once. It was cold. It was brutal. And it was the absolute truth. I hit send without hesitation. A sense of profound finality washed over me. It was not a victory. It was not revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the final shovelful of dirt on the grave of a life that was no longer mine. I had given her what she asked for, closure, but it was not the closure she wanted. It was the closure she deserved. A closed door, a silent phone, an empty inbox. The rest, as they say, is silence. A few weeks after my final email to Chloe, I received one last message from Sarah. She said she felt I needed to know the final outcome, and then she would respect my silence forever. She told me that my email had, in her words, utterly broken Chloe. My indifference had been a more devastating blow than any amount of rage could have been. My refusal to hate her, my statement that I felt nothing at all, had stripped her of her last shred of power. She could no longer cast herself as the tragic, repentant heroine in her own story. She was just a woman who had made a series of bad choices and was now left with nothing. According to Sarah, Chloe had a complete breakdown. She quit her job, unable to face the daily grind and the constant reminder of her diminished circumstances. Her parents, finally realizing that their dream of a neat, tidy reconciliation was impossible, had stepped in. They were supporting her financially, but their support was tinged with disappointment and shame. She was living in their guest house, a 30-something woman forced to move back home, her life in ruins. Ben was long gone. He had moved to another state, taking a new job, attempting to outrun his reputation. He had cut off all contact with Chloe, wanting nothing to do with the woman who was a living symbol of his greatest failure. Chloe was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of her own making. Her parents had apparently pushed her into intensive therapy, and Sarah mentioned that Chloe was finally being forced to confront the deep-seated insecurities and character flaws that had led her down the path of betrayal. It was a long, painful road ahead for her, and there was no guarantee she would ever find her way back. Hearing this news, I felt a strange and complicated mix of emotions. There was a part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I fell in love with all those years ago, that felt a flicker of pity. But it was a distant, detached pity, the kind you might feel for a stranger in a sad movie. The dominant feeling was one of profound and final release. The story was over. The last chapter had been written. The consequences had been fully realized. The scales, in their own grim way, had been balanced. My actions leaving silently, refusing to engage, and cutting them out of my life completely had been the right ones. By refusing to play their game, I had allowed their own actions to become their own punishment. They didn't need me to destroy their lives, they were perfectly capable of doing it themselves. My role was simply to step out of the way and let them. And so, this is where my story ends. Or rather, this is where my new story begins. The past year and a half has been a journey through a hell of my own making, but I have emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. I have learned that a person's character is not defined by the betrayals they suffer, but by how they respond to them. I chose not to be a victim. I chose not to be consumed by hate. I chose to rebuild. My life in this quiet mountain town is simple, but it is real. I have my work, which I still find challenging and rewarding. I have my friends, who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. I have the mountains, which offer a sense of perspective and peace that I never knew I was missing. I am dating again, cautiously, but with an open heart. I met someone. Her name is Anna, and she's a local artist with a kind smile and an honest soul. It's new, and it's fragile, but it's built on a foundation of truth and mutual respect, and for now, that is more than enough. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I look forward to it. I have learned that it is possible to survive the unthinkable. It is possible to walk through the fire and not be burned. It is possible to lose everything you thought you wanted and find something even better in the wreckage. To anyone reading this who might be going through their own version of hell, know this: you are stronger than you think. Do not let their betrayal define you. Do not let their lies become your truth. Your greatest power is your ability to walk away, to choose silence over drama, to choose peace over war. Rebuild your life on your own terms, and one day you will wake up and realize that the ghosts of the past no longer have any power over you. You will be free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more real-life stories from people who have walked through the fire and come out the other side.